All right, listeners, I think you know that we are part of the Radiotopia network, which is basically a network built on the idea that you should support the most creative, independent audio makers around. No one, and I mean no one, embodies the Radiotopia ethos more than Benjamin Walker and his show Theory of Everything. Benjamin, who I've known for a long time, has been making beautiful, personal, sprawling audio documentaries for decades that help us understand the very strange world we live in. And now he has a new series called Not All Propaganda is Art. The new series goes back to the 1950s when Western security agencies like the CIA paid artists, writers, and intellectuals to fight the cultural Cold War.
The CIA funds were free. I mean, no one was told what to say.
Gloria Steinem, activist who sees the CIA as a sort of enlightened pal or rich uncle, there is another viewpoint.
Look, if you're listening to this show, I know you like secret histories. I know you like a mix of culture and politics and shadowy figures. So what are you waiting for? Not All Propaganda is Art from Benjamin Walker. You can find it now wherever you listen or at theoryofeverythingpodcast.com. Hello and welcome to This Day in Esoteric Political History from Radiotopia. My name is Jody Avirgan. It is midterms week. We are looking at some midterm stories that may feel resonant to the midterms we're about to have here in the United States. Today, let's go back to 1826, the first time that midterm elections resulted in a significant defeat for the party of the incumbent president. So there is a pattern that we've talked about before, and this is one of the first times we see that emerging. That president, that incumbent president, was John Quincy Adams, and the 1826 midterm was in large part a rebuke of the contentious presidential election that brought Adams into power. When he became president, despite his opponent winning the popular vote, lots of hard feelings abound, lots of people questioning the legitimacy of that election, the disconnect between the will of the people and the government in place. There's nothing to see here, folks. No parallels whatsoever. The vibes, I don't know. The vibes are similar. Here to discuss, as always, Nicole Hemmer of Vanderbilt and Kelly Carter-Jackson of Wellesley. Hello there.
Hi, Jody.
Hey there.
I want to get to like that 1824 election and then how that impacted the 1826 election. But I just want to point out that when you read about this era, often this midterm is framed as kind of like this is coming out of the quote unquote era of good feelings, right? And maybe this is like things are getting contentious again. If you go back and you look at the era of good feelings, the like most generous definition of it, it was like 9 years.
Not a full decade at best.
I don't know if that counts as era. And then you're like, oh, actually, I think maybe historians are using this like a little tongue in cheek, like era of good feelings. Like, but like it is just funny to me when you think of.
I think you need at least a decade in order to be an era.
Yes. Yeah, exactly. But I love that name, and I suppose the like definition of the era of good feelings was in a sense that like the Federalists had sort of gone away at this point. In the like 1820s now you have a little stability in terms of two parties, but then you have this 1824 election in which Adams wins, John Quincy Adams wins, but as I mentioned, there are a lot of questions about how that went down. So we should lay that groundwork. Yeah,
it's called the corrupt bargain. And I mean, it's funny.
There's a good name.
I think of the corrupt bargain in terms of like the end of Reconstruction. We know that like another close election, 1876 is another moment in which you get this same sentiment or feeling. But yeah, because the elections were so close, because, John Quincy Adams actually loses the popular vote, there's all of these questions about legitimacy and is this a legitimate president? I think Jackson really goads a lot of these feelings as well. And, he'll get his turn later, he becomes president later. But I do think that you have this new moment in which people are thinking even more intensely about these political lines and factions that become much more hardened in the 19th century.
And Andrew Jackson was somebody who ran as a man of the people, as a kind of populist. And John Quincy Adams, of course, was the son of a president. And so you have already this framework for understanding the 1824 battle. And then here you have the popular vote being overridden by the Electoral College, which this corrupt bargain and the corrupt bargain of 1877, a good reminder that the Electoral College has raised questions of legitimacy from the very beginning, something to keep in mind for reasons.
So, and we haven't done either corrupt bargain episode specifically. So I suppose this is a little bit of our chance to do that in 1824. But, the accusation is that Adams, who had lost the popular vote and then, twists the Electoral College, but basically promises House Speaker Henry Clay a plum post Secretary of State in his administration in return for pulling the levers of this vote and getting him into power. And it becomes, no surprise, like a really salient talking point. I think people by 2 years later maybe have forgotten what exactly the corrupt bargain was, but that's just a sticky enough phrase that there's this real resentment and this real sense of wanting to rebuke Adams come midterms.
And Jackson supporters haven't forgotten it. They're outraged that Jackson doesn't become president. They're outraged that they're represented by Adams people when they're Jackson people. And that is going to play a big role come these midterms, because it's particularly in districts where there are members of Adams' party who are representing districts that are majority Jackson supporters, where you're going to see this big, well, I guess the first blue wave since Andrew Jackson is the father of the Democratic Party.
Yeah, it's funny. I mean, some people have called this the first blue wave election. I'm a little... A lot has changed in the Democratic and Republican Party since then. I don't even know if
and the electoral system.
But you know what? Go for it. If you're a historian, why not? Give it that name, the first blue wave election. So Jackson supporters, they gain 9 seats. They do win a majority, 113 to 100. That even just brings up the question of which we were discussing earlier, is this a wave or is this a swing or whatever, or rebuke or whatever? But it is a rebuke in that way. The nature of the rebuke and the nature of the way the election plays out is really fascinating. And I think a lot of people have pointed to this as kind of in some way one of the first nationalized midterms, where it was less about my specific district, my specific representative, and really about this large national narrative about unhappiness with the incumbent administration.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And I think that, if we think about who Jackson is and who John Quincy Adams is. John Quincy Adams is coming from the free state of Massachusetts. He is also, as Nikki mentioned, the son of a former president. He has a background to him that I think people who are part of Jackson's party would be skeptic of, because Jackson is the first, when he becomes president, the first president of the West. Really, Tennessee is sort of seen as the Western front. But he has this very rugged kind of appeal to him. He's very much pro-slavery. And I think, it's also during this time that you have like the nullification crisis, and tensions in slavery are definitely heating up. And you have a moment when some scholars in the 1820s wonder if the Civil War could have even taken place then. So because there was so much tension between slave states and free states. So a lot is on the line politically and economically. And in some ways, I think people thought that this would be a referendum about how we might think about where the country goes from here.
And that referendum is both a referendum on slavery. So Jackson joins up with John C. Calhoun, who was Adams' vice president, but also his rival because of the funky system that the U.S. had. And they are giving money to a pro-slavery newspaper in order to attack President Adams. And then also there's this criticism of Adams, and this has a very Jacksonian feel to it as well, that the Adams administration was corrupt, that Adams was using public monies to fill the executive mansion with all of these luxurious goods, and that he wasn't a man of the people. He was part of this wealthy elite who was skimming off of the public coffers in order to surround himself with luxury. And that 1-2 punch of both pro-slavery sentiment and anti-corruption or anti-elite sentiment come together in a really powerful package, even though, as you can imagine, there's a lot of contradictions in bringing those two things together.
Yeah. And they come together in a large part because of a sort of media environment. And there's stories here of, the Jackson camp recruiting editors of powerful newspapers, maybe even paying them off, and then other side paying off other editors. And you have sort of like warring press as part of this too. And so a lot of this does feel like, in many ways, the first of a very modern phenomenon. And just to put it into some context, we've talked about the sort of like fundamentals of midterm elections, but in the 47 midterm elections since this one in 1826, the president's party has lost seats in 41 of them. And you can also see the sort of playbook of pushing back against the incumbent party, painting them as corrupt and ineffectual, kind of capitalizing on simmering grievances from the previous presidential election in the first midterm. You see that play out in 1862 when, there's a rebuke against Lincoln, and then 1938. And, a lot of these elections sort of follow this playbook that seems to have really emerged in 1826.
Which is just, to sort of piggyback off what you said, like, it's so crucial, the role that the press plays in this election, because this really is the first election in which you have like a press that is used to sort of demonize the other party or bolster, the party that they want in power. And it becomes more and more important what gets out there in the public, who's influencing the public, or who has the largest, mic in a sense, in order to get people to believe what it is that they're reading and be convinced and want to come to the other side. I mean, newspapers play a crucial role. And we should also say, this is a separate tangent, but like literacy rates are also taking off in major ways during the 1820s and 30s. So people have an insatiable appetite for reading, not just the Bible, because that was like the main text, but also newspapers and political papers at that.
Yeah, and most papers were political papers. There wasn't yet a tradition of an objective press. So throughout the 18th and 19th centuries, all of these newspapers were, not all of them, but most newspapers were affiliated with one party or with one faction. And so you would get pretty robust advocacy in newspapers throughout this period.
Yeah. All right. Well, again, not to say that everything is super tidy and echoey to now, but this does feel like a lot of strands there. And I'm like coming back to this era of good feelings thing. 100 years from now, are people going to talk about 2008 to 2016 as an era of good feelings, and then those of us who lived through it are like, well, not so much. But yes,
depends on who you are.
Exactly.
Actually, a good counterpoint to this is the 1990s as that decade of peace and prosperity, and then you look at the 90s and you're like,
You write a book about the 90s in your case. There you go.
I wonder too.
Just getting that plug in.
Is the era of good feelings also coming to a close because you have John Adams and Thomas Jefferson, two founding fathers, dying on the same day, the 4th of July, no less.
What a tidbit. July 4th, 1826, both Adams and Jefferson die.
50 years after the signing of the Declaration of Independence.
Yeah.
Incredible. Yeah.
So that seems like the end of era to me.
Definitely.
All right. And that's the end of our episode. Nicole Hammer, thanks to you.
Thank you, Jody.
And Kelly Carter Jackson, thanks to you.
My pleasure.
Radiotopia.